Right, so let me first start to explain what this panel discussion is all about today. And I think we're going to follow what we just discussed this morning with the Vice President and also the Prime Minister, which is all about how we can ensure that children have a positive experience online, and that we can help by, designing projects that are, safe by design, but also the data use of children is used in a responsible way. And also that maybe we can, ensure an obligation to ensure age appropriate content here online, because so far the experience hasn't been very, successful, I believe. So without further ado, let me first ask perhaps each of you for a quick intro on, your takeaway from, experience in this field. And I would like to start with you, June. That's why I was waiting for you, because I think we need to start with the Commission first. You work as a head of unit at DG Connect, and you're working on accessibility, multilingualism, and safer internet. And your work consists to promote a better internet for children by protecting and empowering children online and improving the content available online for them. So, June, what's your take on today's topic?
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. It's such a joy to be in a full room. It's wonderful, so lovely. Thank you for taking the time today. So we've had a great keynote from Commissioner Vice President Suica, who's really, I think, done my job partly for me, explaining the big strategy, what it's about, what the vision is. But as she said, we have these three key words, really: protect, empower, respect children's views and involve them in shaping the digital environment. And I'm very delighted to be in two panels today, one talking about protection, one talking about the empowerment and the skills. So in terms of the protection actions that we've set ourselves as the Commission, but also that we invite the member states, and obviously we invite industry to join us on, I'll really just say a couple of words about the main actions, I think, as they relate to this, the topic of this panel. So I would love to say it was all planned, but maybe the stars aligned. We were very lucky that we had political agreement on the Digital Services Act just before the adoption of this Child's Right package on 11th of May. Now, obviously, the DSA isn't fully published yet, but it was adopted in record time. We had input from both co-legislators on child safety provisions, which I think shows very much the political will to change the current status quo. And the DSA really gives us teeth, if you like, for one of our key actions, which is a code of conduct on comprehensive age-appropriate design. So comprehensive code of conduct on age-appropriate design, that way around. And with that code, and under the DSA, although the code will be voluntary, we hope it will cover all different aspects of child safety, because there are many different aspects there. And as you said, you as a parent, these experiences, there's a lot of responsibility at the moment on children themselves, but particularly on families, because we don't have this safety by design and by default embedded in the tools we're giving our kids at ever younger ages. So we want to work with industry, with young people, and of course with the member states as well, to see how we can help industry really implement the existing legislation. When we did our consultations and when we did our own analysis leading to the big strategy, as has been said, the digital wing of the Rights of the Child strategy, we realized that really we don't need new legislation. Obviously, we're very happy about the DSA, but what we do need is effective implementation of the provisions that are already there in EU texts. And in fact, there are so many EU texts already relating to child online safety that we produced a compendium to accompany the strategy and the child-friendly version that Vice President Suica just presented. So this code of conduct is going to be one of our key actions, and also just picking up on two other points that the Commissioner said. Age verification, I think, is key to putting those sort of, the walled gardens in place. We have children using tools that are clearly designed and not intended for children, and because we don't have effective age verification, it's super easy to ignore this service is only for 13 plus, because you enter whatever date of birth you want or you tick a box. Those days should be numbered. That should not be the that is not effective age verification. We know there are technologies out there. We've had a great pilot project, EU Consent, that shows we can have interoperable systems, giving the consumers choice, giving people the ways to choose how they want to share their digital identity and prove their age. And really, the easiest way should not be using your social media account. So we have to change that dynamic. And this is one thing we hope to offer as an option through the European digital identity that's also been mentioned already, that people can have that option. Now, that's something that's in the hands of the member states. But we know, for example, in Norway, where there is digital identity, there's been great uptake. I think in Norway they offer it from 13 upwards, huge uptake, great satisfaction. Let's look at that. And last but not least, so I've mentioned age verification, proof of age, e-identity, and the code of conduct. And I've probably gone over 5 minutes, so I apologize.
No, perfect. June, I think it's nice to set up the scene like this with, bigger picture and what your plan and what exactly concretely the 3 pillars you mentioned and so on. I'd like to move on to our next panel speaker today, Melissa Mathisen. You're the Director of Regulatory Future at the UK Information Commissioner's Office, and you are responsible for delivery of the Children's Code, or also called the Age-Appropriate Design Code, I believe. It's a data protection code of practice for online services likely to be accessed by children. So I think the UK has got 1 year experience already with the code, I believe. So
yes,
can you tell us a bit more on this work you're doing in the UK?
Yes, absolutely, and thank you for inviting me to speak at this event today. Yes, the Children's Code. It's we thought it'd be useful to give you a bit of an understanding of what we've learned from the Children's Code, and some of what's going to be happening next, we think, with new legislation coming in, but also how we work collaboratively with others in this space as well. So the Children's Code is a principle-based code based on the principles of GDPR. It has 15 standards, and it does its underlying purpose is exactly the same as the European strategy for better internet for kids. It's exactly as it says, make the internet better for kids. So making sure that children have appropriate experiences, that they are safeguarded as much as possible, and have a safe environment within which to play and study on the internet. The code came into force in September 2020, but with a transition period of 12 months. So that took us up to September 2021. In the weeks and days before that deadline, we started to see some quite seismic shifts by information society services and platforms as well, where they started to make changes that were really beneficial to children. So, for example, we saw privacy settings set as high, geolocation turned off as default, prevention of nudging children onto lower settings. We also saw that children were receiving better tools in order to manage their own privacy settings and privacy rights. And importantly, we also saw some controls in place. So, for example, on some streaming platforms, we saw that children were no longer able to share videos or audio with people that weren't within their friendship groups, and also to try and prevent communication with strangers as well. I think importantly, these measures weren't just made in order to for the UK market, but actually were made globally. So we're actually really quite proud of the code. We think it has helped. It's been influential on a global basis. But that doesn't mean that there isn't more to be done. There's a lot more to be done. What we're trying to do in the ICO is proactively supervise the conformance with the code. So, for example, over the last few months, we've been supervising 50 different companies in order to identify how they are applying the code in their experiences. And we found out quite a lot. And I'll probably be able to talk about some of those trends and patterns through the questioning session.
Right.
We've also identified that age assurance still has some way to go, exactly as June said. There is, it's still an evolving industry. I think it's developed an awful lot in the last 12 months that we've been really scrutinising this, but what we did decide to do is set up our own project just to look at age assurance in particular. Some of the things that we've been doing in order to help with that is, for example, we published last autumn our opinion on age assurance, which tried to help industry and organisations to understand what our expectations are around how age assurance should be in place, and based on proportionality as well, based on the risk to the child. We're also doing quite a bit of research as well, because I think there are some ways to go around understanding how we measure the accuracy and the standards of accuracy around age assurance as well. And we're also working with Ofcom in order to properly understand how children and parents' attitudes combine with age assurance and what they think about things as well. And most of all, making sure that we are properly engaging with people that are making these initiatives, whether that's through our sandbox or through our certifications, working with trade bodies, organisations and industries in order to help with this. Coming up as well, we've just got new legislation with the Online Safety Bill, which really takes on from some of the children's code work that we're doing. So we are working with Ofcom in that area. In the UK, we have a forum called the DRCF, the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum. Bit of a mouthful. Say it 1,000 times and it trips off. But that is there in order to try and ensure seamless regulation where these issues are hitting other regulatory areas as well. So we really look forward to working in that environment in order to make sure that we work together with the new legislation coming in as well.
Thank you, Melissa. I think you have a busy agenda. Really impressive what you're doing, and it's also all new, so you have no experience, so you're really starting from scratch, and great initiatives that also the Europe is kind of looking into, I imagine, and also internationally, like you say, you might be also helping other countries and providing them some best practices here. I'm very pleased to welcome our third keynote panelist today, to represent actually international NGO as well in this topic, because this is also very crucial to speak with such a organization. We have today with us Leanda Barrington-Leach. She's the Director of International Advocacy and also Head of European Affairs at Five Rights. And your main area of work focuses on data and privacy, child-centered design and children's rights, I believe, right? So what is your take on this topic of today?
Thank you very much, Claire-Marie. Thank you to the organisers and also to the previous speakers for the very interesting interventions. Indeed, my name's Leanda. The Five Rights Foundation exists to build the digital world that young people deserve. We're a small NGO, but we do work globally. What we do is we do consultation with children. We do our own research. We work also on technical standards, and we do a lot of expert support to regulators, as well as, on top of that, advocacy work. We do work, as I say, globally. We do a lot of work at the multilateral level, at the UN, OECD, G7, Council of Europe. We work increasingly here in Brussels, in particular, given all of the digital legislation and policy that's being worked on at the moment. We do substantial work also in the US, where there's a Californian age-appropriate design code going through the State Assembly as we speak, which is very much based on the UK code. Also with the African Union and with national governments. As Claire-Marie said, our work mainly gathers around two pillars, so data protection and safety by design. At least these are the two avenues that we use for the implementation and enforcement of children's rights in the digital world. So I would really like to address the two questions given to us, which was what do we think of the regulation and the policies that are there, and what can industry do more. But first, before doing that, I think as an NGO, it's also our role to come back on some of the issues themselves, and I'd like to make just a few points to help frame the discussion today. So first, I want to talk about scale. So when we talk about children in the digital world, it shouldn't be a niche discussion. It shouldn't just be, one thing on the agenda further down that people who work on children's rights address. Commissioner Sucha before said that 1 in 5 people in the European Union is a child. Globally, 1 in 3 users of digital services and products is a child. So this is a lot. As I say, it's not just this little thing down there. And as was also mentioned, the digital world is not optional for children. As an adult, many of the things are more optional, actually, than for children. Children do not have a choice. Their social relationships, their education, increasingly, it goes through the digital world. And we need to take this into account and how it impacts really every aspect of their life. Secondly, regarding principle, children have established rights. It's really important to say that children are all under 18s, not under 13s, under 18s. They have established rights, and these rights, they follow the child. The rights are not applicable to the setting, right? It's not the road that has rights, it's not the school that has rights, it's not the platform. The rights are applicable to the child, and they apply wherever the child is in practice, full stop. These rights, it wasn't easy to get children these rights that are to a high level of protection, to freedom from commercial exploitation, to the prioritization of their well-being, their development and their best interests. It was really a fight to get children these rights. But now that they've been established in the 1989 Convention on the Rights of the Child, this is the most ratified human rights treaty in the world. So, we've established them, we need to implement them, we need to protect them. And online, that is just not the case. Frankly, they are blatantly ignored a lot of the time. That is because of a basic principle that online everyone is equal, meaning everyone is an adult. And if we do not have any recognition of children online, we don't recognize them their age because partly we don't have any age assurance, then they do not get an age-appropriate experience. The policy response so far has largely been, one, age gating. So age assurance is incredibly important, but it should not be used to shut children out. If the solution is, let's protect children by just keeping them in their little space, this is not the answer. The second approach has often been to talk about education, which is important, yes, but then also putting the burden on children to sort it out themselves, like you should know better, on parents and on teachers who, first of all, not all children have parents, not all children have parents who are able and willing to manage parental control tools and to watch all of their activity in the digital world. And once again, should we really be watching everything that our children are doing? Especially when we're talking about older children, this is not necessarily an appropriate solution in line with their rights and best interests. More ambitious regulatory responses generally seek to address the system, but they focus normally on certain types of products or services rather than following the child. So this is the case, for example, if we look at the DSA, if we look at even the AI Act. There are lots and lots of interesting provisions here, but they're all bitty and partial, and they're not centered around children's rights and following the child. Thirdly, on impacts, there is an impact, and it's very clear, and it's very measurable most of the time as well. It's clear that what we're doing so far is not an effective response. I think we can mostly agree with that, and I'd just like to give you a few examples. So consider addiction. 4 in 10 children say they rarely disconnect from social media. Various studies find between a third and half of kids worry themselves that they are addicted to the internet. Consider commercial exploitation. So many online games, for example, are deliberately designed to extract as much money as possible from players. So what does that mean? It means that essential aspects of the game, such as energy and experience, they appear as resources that deplete before the player's eyes, with the option, of course, to pay for better gameplay. 80% of apps that are marked as suitable for 5-year-olds contain in-app purchases. 15% of children have stolen money to pay for loot boxes in games. And then you could consider that multi-billion-dollar platforms such as TikTok and Roblox depend on children for free content creation. Or consider body image. 80% of girls have considered changing their appearance online. Many girls will not post without a filter. Consider gender stereotypes and violence. 10% of 12 and 13-year-olds say that they are addicted to porn. 80% of girls say that they are regularly put under pressure to provide sexual images of themselves. More and more girls are also increasingly withdrawing from social media platforms, so they're being silenced. And I won't go into detail about considering child sexual abuse, but this is, of course, really very much the tip of the iceberg and the most serious point, which is growing massively and very fast. And the fastest growing category of child sexual abuse online is self-generated imagery, and it's involving 7 to 10-year-olds. So where's the problem? Well, I'd say just like, we humans, we are part of the problem. We're far from perfect, and we put a lot of nasty stuff out there, and some people do some really, sometimes nasty things. But the way that many of these popular digital products and services are designed makes this problem worse. It doesn't help it. And why is this? This is because the data economy is an attention economy. So it intentionally uses persuasive design techniques to keep users online, engaging, sharing, creating content, including children. And children, they're particularly vulnerable, I would say, also to these psychological techniques, and it exposes them to a very wide range of risks. We recently completed some research called the Pathways Research, and this research showed that social media accounts across various platforms that we had designed registered as children, right? So they were all children's accounts. They were all subject to messaging from strangers and to illegal or harmful content recommended to them within hours of being set up. These accounts, on the one hand, were targeted for ads, so advertising for games, sweets, teenage tampons, things like this. So it's clear that they knew that they were children's accounts, and it was possible to recommend age-appropriate material. But at the same time, they were also recommended harmful content, from sexualized to pro-suicide material. And why is that? We know that at least on one of these platforms, the algorithm weights negative and extreme content 5 times higher than neutral or positive content. So it makes sense. I'd invite you just to take a look maybe at our microsite, Risky by Design, to look at some of the features and how that comes about. So typical features in the products and services that children use, and that show that very much the problem is a feature of the system, it's not a bug. So what can we do about it? The priority really has to be to work upstream to ensure safety, privacy, and security by design and default. So we need to anticipate and mitigate the risks of children. And in an ideal world, we go further than that and we actually consider their best interests and their well-being, and we design with that in mind. So what do we need? The digital world indeed has enormous potential. So we're here to talk about positive experience. It can happen. But to make the digital world that young people deserve, what would we need? One, we need to recognize children and recognize their rights. So wherever they are and whoever they are and what age. So not just on big platforms, not just on services targeted at children or intended for use by children, or on certain types of services. As I say, the rights follow the child, and not just younger children. In many ways, older children are more at risk because they use more services and they have less parental supervision. We need standards, so we need basic minimum health and safety product standards, and also we need standards for age assurance to make sure that it's proportionate and privacy preserving. Codes of conduct, that's great. Voluntary codes of conduct should be where we should be talking about going further than minimum safety standards and actually designing with children's best interests and well-being in mind. We need risk assessments which cover all risks. We need evidence, so we need better tracking and categorizing of harms. And this is also not just scanning for CSAM, for example. We need actual, a comprehensive approach. We need oversight, and we need enforcement, which is effective for children in line with their vulnerabilities and an understanding they do not have the same autonomy as adults. So it should be based more on the precautionary principle, for example, and the regulator should have a duty to investigate on behalf of children. So as I said, just to sum up a bit, we have many good and interesting proposals. So we have the Data Protection Regulation, the DSA, the AI Act, the Product Safety Regulation, the CSEA proposal, but they all contain partial answers. And because it's a bit everywhere, enforcement is probably going to be tricky, to say the least. So outstanding questions would be, for example, how do we address persuasive design techniques? So beyond just dark patterns, although how we address dark patterns is still a big one, but how do we address the persuasive design techniques that are there hooking children? How do we apply and enforce children's rights in the metaverse? All of this is not clear based on the policies and the legislation that we have. So what we need is a comprehensive child-centered approach, and I think the age-appropriate design code is very much a good place to start, and I hope we'll maybe talk a bit more about it afterwards. The general comment number 25 provides the comprehensive policy approach. I have a copy of the Child Online Safety Toolkit here, which is there for policymakers to implement the general comment. There are frameworks for age assurance, there are frameworks for risk assessment, there's the 4-step model for AI oversight, there's a technical standard for age-appropriate design, which exists. The Australians have developed wonderful safety by design tools, so there is really, really a lot there. And I'd just like to conclude by saying that kids deserve better, and we can and must deliver for them. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Leanda. Yes, we'll definitely go back to this enforcement aspect and also the code of conduct. And before we move on to our next two panel speakers, I'd like to also invite all of you here today, but also online, to think of questions or clarification you would like perhaps to ask some of those speakers after we have heard from everyone. So, yes. Let's move on now to Julie. Julie Dosani, you're the Chief Policy and Regulatory Officer at Yoti. And actually, it's really interesting to have you here because Yoti is okay, it's a scale-up first also. And you have a headquarter in London, but you also specialize in identity checking systems. You have a lot of experience working with many different third-party players in different sectors, not only child online website, but also, financial services and banking and so on. And you already provide different tools, to verify people online and in person, providing various products, including identity verification, age verification, and e-signature and authentication. So it's great to also hear and see that there is going to be also an economic aspect, like I said, like competition will be happening. We also need to ensure we don't lock children to one solution to authenticate, that we offer them freedom to choose whether they want to use one logging solution, be it social media, whatever, and other governments, like this e-identity wallets, perhaps that could be one, depending if you have an identity paper with you, of course. But yeah, can you give us your input, on this topic, experience you have in this field?
Certainly, thank you so much, Claire. So Yoti is a B corporation, which is quite different for a tech company. B corporations are organizations that don't just look at the bottom line. They're looking at their profit, their purpose, and the planet. And when we started to look at age a few years ago, we really wanted to look at that inclusion angle and the angle of choice that you mentioned. So we were a team of nearly 500 people operating globally. And you might have heard of some of our work, for example, in age with the likes of the NSPCC Childline, which is enabling a child to share just an under 18 attribute to apply to have an indecent image removed with the Report Remove service. Also with law enforcement, we provide one of our approaches to help reduce the toll on law enforcement officers who have to triage, as you know, many millions of images and look at the age of the victim and the age of the perpetrator. And as well as that, we work across lots and lots of sectors, so from gaming, gambling, social media, live streaming, edtech sites. Recently, we published some work, for example, with Instagram in the US, starting to look at how this approach could be one of several with choice for young people who change their name on an Instagram, change their age on an Instagram account. Is that right? Are they in the age-appropriate area? So absolutely, this element of age-appropriate design is one that we think is really important. Once you know the age of the child, you can put lots of different elements in place, not to gate them out of areas, but to provide the right experience for them. I don't think anyone in this room wants 5-year-olds streaming to lots of 50-year-olds, having alerts at 2 in the morning, or inappropriate contacts from people not of their group or age. So how can age assurance support that? We've been so fortunate to take part in some of the initiatives mentioned previously, so with the ICO Sandbox, working jointly with them to help us extend, in particular, one of our approaches to a younger demographic and to build education materials to help parents, young people, teachers, and policymakers understand more some of the approaches. We also work with the World Economic Forum in their Global Coalition for Digital Safety, with We Protect, part of the trade body represented here today, the Age Verification Providers Association, and we've also taken part in the project that June mentioned, the EU Consent Project. So absolutely, we are fully committed that there should be a choice of age approaches. They have to meet GDPR, need to be privacy preserving, interoperable, data minimized, and meet standards. And thanks to the work of the EU Consent Project, there are standards that are evolving further. Several years ago, there was already one publicly available specification for age checking, and I was privileged to take part in that development. And now there's both an IEEE and an ISO standard, a good way down the track that can support the different regulations coming through. There is already a growing and healthy, vibrant ecosystem of age providing association companies. I don't know if some of you know the FSM and the KGM in Germany, but they have actually done due diligence and approved over 80 methods. I think we have a representative in the audience for age checking. And I would encourage any of you that hasn't looked at the work of the KGM and the FSM to do that. So just one little snapshot on one of the approaches that we find is the one that actually consumers are choosing most and platforms are finding the lowest friction, which is the one that is actually used also just announced in recent days with Instagram in the US, is the facial age analysis. And inclusion has been one of the topics that has been at the fore. So not everyone will have a document. Not everyone will have either access, even if they own that document. So one of the approaches we've developed is actually built on an AI technique where we've given it lots of images with just the month and year of age. So it hasn't got any names, it hasn't got any addresses. And then when it sees a new face, it just assesses that face, looks at the age, and gives that age element to the platform. So there's no other personal details, and that image is instantly deleted. And this is not unique recognition, as the ICO has recently pointed out, so it isn't a special category in terms of GDPR. We're really clear about the bias, and anyone that wants to can look at the white paper and see the exact bias levels for each age and across gender. And we think that's super important so that young people can understand it. We've developed a whole range of education materials as well. And what we're seeing is that platforms are happy to engage and want to understand the range of approaches. So we want platforms to have choice so that consumers can have choice. And I think overall, that is really key. We're seeing that there is an increasing interest from civil society, from governments, from regulatory bodies to talk amongst themselves. And I think across the industry of age providers, we're really keen to take part in that dialogue and delighted to be able to support the fact that there are now effective age mechanisms coming through for age verification and to be part of that movement. So Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Julie. Very interesting to hear from your company on what you're already doing in this field, because it's quite a new field, I would say, for Europe, and we have not so much experience, and we're still going to have to learn. As mentioned, we're still at the beginning, the premises of this age verification issue. As technology evolve as well, and behavior online will evolve, we'll have to adapt. So I'm very pleased to have now Dave. Thank you for your patience. It's been quite a long waiting for you. Sorry about that. But Dave, you're the safety policy director for the EMEA region at Meta. So you have a vast region to cover with different challenges, especially. And Meta, of course, we hear a lot about you because you provide so many services, and also online services where children's are of course there, and also messaging services. So yes, you are on the scope, of course, on for most of those proposals. And you're also very active in this field for many years. You're a member of the European Commission's Alliance to better protect minors online. You're also the Child Dignity Alliance, and you're also a former member of the We Protect Global Alliance 2021 Global Threat Analysis Steering Group. So, what's your experience here at Meta with this issue of, child safety by design? You design so many projects, so how do you ensure this from the beginning when you design your projects and your future projects?
Great question, Claire-Marie. Thank you very much, and great to be here today. And I'll address that in my opening remarks, so thank you. So, firstly, thank you for inviting me to participate in the panel today, and for the opportunity to share how Meta is working to protect and empower young people on our platform. I also want to acknowledge the global leadership role the European Commission has played in global child online safety. I remember attending the very first Safer Internet celebration in 2004, hosted in Luxembourg, with 14 countries. I'm old enough to remember that. 18 years on, I've attended all but one, and now there are 200 countries involved, which is extraordinary. Once again, the European Commission is demonstrating extraordinary leadership, publishing its new strategy for a better internet for kids and regulatory proposal to prevent and combat child sexual abuse, all against the broader backdrop of the Digital Services Act. And the Code of Conduct on Age-Appropriate Design in particular is something we support and look forward to working on with the Commission. Meta, too, has a long-standing and deep commitment to the safety of children and young people. For more than a decade, across Meta's family of apps, which include Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and in virtual reality, we have invested in teams and technology to keep our users safe, with more than 40,000 people in this area, spending approximately $5 billion on safety and security in 2021 alone. It's also important to acknowledge that we do significant collaborative work with many others in this room today. This is a landscape problem, and no one platform or stakeholder can do this alone. Given the theme of this panel discussion today, and ensuring we deliver on the promise of a positive experience for children, I'm going to focus on three overarching product design principles that Meta wants to ensure an age-appropriate experience. The first is responsible empowerment. We strongly believe in the importance of responsibly empowering young people to enjoy the benefits our platform provides, such as self-expression, playing games, staying in touch with their friends, finding new passions and interests, and keeping up with the creators, organizations, and public figures that they admire. Second is age-appropriate safeguards. We take a holistic approach to protecting all users, especially young people, on our platforms, and are constantly iterating on new features with this regard, of which more I'll speak about in a moment. And last, but by no means, innovation. We take a responsible approach to innovation. We're committed to building inclusive, privacy-centric products and anticipating and addressing the risks of new technologies. And let me give an example that encompasses all three principles. Informed by regulation and guidance such as the UK Age-Appropriate Design Code, the Irish Data Protection Authority's Children's Fundamentals, and the French CNIL recommendations on minors, this month we publicly announced Meta's Best Interests of the Child framework. We've made the complete framework and some thoughts about it available today on our virtual reality stand here today that you can look at. Designing digital experiences to serve young people's best interests requires accounting for a number of different perspectives, including those of experts, regulators, parents, and young people themselves. At times, these differing points of view require us to navigate quite complex trade-offs. When building Instagram's new parental supervision tools, for example, parents and some lawmakers encouraged us to give parents detailed insights about what their teens were doing on the app. But we also heard from other global experts and teens themselves that it was important to respect teens' evolving expectations of privacy and to promote their autonomy as they grow by learning, playing, and creating online. These tools are really important in terms of going forward, and as we launch parental supervision in the United States ahead of a global rollout, they're a great opportunity for parents and children to interact around parental supervision tools, make those choices, and make wise choices. This parental supervision tool is available both on Instagram and Oculus Quest. So here is a great example of how Meta designs products and implements these guiding principles both for current technology and for immersive environments too. And finally, having shared some examples of responsible empowerment, I'm just going to touch on age-appropriate safeguards and innovation. It's important to say that Facebook and Instagram require children to be at least 13 years of age before they can create an account. Coupled with privacy by default for new users for under 18s on both Instagram and Facebook, we know children value that. And no doubt you'll be aware of the raft of new Instagram safety well-being features like Take a Break and Topic Nudges, which are all about giving young people the tools to control their online experience and support their well-being. We have also been following closely emerging technologies and standards around data assurance. And on June 23rd, as already been mentioned, we're taking the exciting step by testing new options for people on Instagram to verify their age by starting with people based in the US. Using a combination of social vouching and selfie video using face-based age prediction through Yoti, a company that specializes in privacy-preserving ways to verify age, and who I'm delighted is on the panel today. I think it's a great example of how technology companies are cooperating together to find really innovative solutions. And finally, as we continue to deliver these exciting new features, it's vitally important young people are aware of them. It's the reason why on June 10th, we announced Meta's European Youth Safety Education campaign. The campaign focuses on underscoring 6 safety and well-being tools across Instagram and Facebook through a series of fun videos designed by an amazing young Belgian creative talent in consultation with the Gen Z community. The campaign will run on posts, reels, and through adverts, targeting mainly teams on Meta-owned and safety partner pages in selected countries throughout the summer. In the first weeks of the campaign, it has already reached more than 15 million young Europeans, which we're really pleased with. So with that, I'll hand back to Claire Marie.
Thank you so much, Dave. We can give an applause to Dave as well. So we've heard introduction from all of you now, and I'd like to see if there's any question first from our audience here in the room or clarification perhaps to what our panelists have been saying so far. I have a questions that came from the audience online, so I'll take this one first. And tell me if you want to take this one, who volunteers. This is a question from Mark Liza. He's the CEO of the Global Privacy Rights. So thank you, Mark. And his question is this one. Should all publicly accessible websites begin with respecting the rights of the child? And would this mean that, like in physical space, it will be adults that need to verify their age? Shouldn't adults or similar people be required to provide consent prior to surveillance and tracking by online services? So who wants to take this question?
I'll have a go.
Thank you,
I think that where it's very, very challenging is in order to make something, make websites and publicly available platforms safe for children. It does mean that it has an impact as well on adults. So I do think that, you know, whatever we do, we have to do it in a privacy-enhancing way as much as we possibly can, and that's why I think the GDPR principles are so important across all of this as well, and also that we make sure that we design that privacy in, particularly from the very start of initiatives as well.
Great, thank you, Melissa. Do you want to react as well?
Maybe just complement that?
Yes.
Yes, I mean, I think, as has been mentioned, I think also a risk-based approach is really proportionate and is correct. For example, where I also look at accessibility, so where we're looking at the accessibility of all public sector websites across Europe and mobile apps as well. And, you know, in terms of public sector information, do we need to have age controls in place? Of course not. But when we're talking about tools that bring a risk with them of this stranger danger, of sharing of personal data that perhaps has impact that a child may not understand, there are many different scenarios online. So I think certainly something blanket is not what we're calling for. But I think proportionate and relevant measures that are based on risk assessment, as envisaged in the DSA, indeed, is more the way that we'll be going.
Thank you. Julie, you also want to...
Yes, I mean, I think, you know, the car was built 120 years ago. It took literally 120 years for not just to have seatbelts mandatory, but also to have child seats. Nobody now would think of going out of the hospital with their newborn baby and letting it rattle around in the boot. But we probably all remember, or some of us might remember, journeys when we were young where that was the case. So absolutely, I think Mark has a point. Nobody wants surveillance. Nobody wants mass tracking. And absolutely, that is something that is not being called for here. What we're looking is a data minimized sharing of, say, an over 18 attribute or, say, an under 18 attribute, and doing that in a privacy preserving manner. But I think everyone in this room would agree that societies are judged by how we treat our children. And I think that is the proportionality that most in this room would look for.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark, for your question. Is there any question from the audience? Yes, I see someone raising his hand here from the...
Thank you. I'm Ian Corby. It's been my huge privilege to be a project manager on the EU consent project, which June kindly mentioned, where we've had 1,600 children and adults across Europe being able to prove their age with one website and then reuse that with other websites, interoperability, you know, which is going to be essential. Otherwise, it'll be the new cookie pop-up annoyance. The project comes to an end in August, and we're trying to think how we take it forward. And we've got the three options ahead of us, which are represented on the panel. We could ask June and the European Parliament, perhaps some MEPs, to sponsor a preparatory action to keep this project going forward in the public sector. We could ask Yoti and some other age verification providers to get together and take it forward on a commercial basis between themselves. Or we could go cap in hand to our friends in big technology who might get some benefit from EU consent and ask Meta and Google and others to perhaps sponsor a fund to keep this going. Which of the three would the panel advise us to take?
Good question.
Good question. Thank you so much, Ian, and I hope your project will definitely survive. And let's see who wants to volunteer and continue this next project. And
I think
June?
I probably have to take that one. I mean, I think EU consent has been a great success, and really thanks to Ian and to all the people involved in the project, as well as the families who agreed to be the testers for us. So we have, I think, more than a proof of concept. We know that the technology works, that interoperability works, and we would love to take it forward. Now, you know, I can't write Ian a check. I'm sorry, I wish I could, but I can't. And I hope, however, that it's something that can remain open. I think what we want to avoid, and I think you've heard already, we want to support innovation because, as has been mentioned, there are many different techniques out there, and that will change. So it's also an economic opportunity for the whole tech sector. We really see this as a growth sector. So we want to stimulate that innovation. So I think however that project and similar projects are funded in the future may have to be a blend, because what we want to avoid is it becoming sort of a monopoly or a duopoly situation. And I, you know, really will support Ian and do the best I can, but no checkbook, I'm afraid.
Julie, you also have a...
Yes, no, I wanted to echo those comments. So absolutely, this has been a tremendous project to take part in. And I think one of the great things that the team has achieved has been bringing together civil society, bringing together academics, doing co-creation that was mentioned, as well as working with large platforms and with age verification providers. However, I think that education still has a way to go to work with every one of the member states. It would be such a shame if you think of all the small countries that might not have the capacity to do the work that the Germans have done with the FSM and the KGM. The standards are now evolving, and what would be tremendous is across all member states that the equivalents of the ICOs were able to look to the work of the EU Consent Project and take that forward in their considerations as they look at the Better Internet for Kids, they look at the Digital Services Act, and they look at how they, for example, transpose and work with the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. So I think the time is right for these discussions to continue, and hopefully over these coming weeks we can all work together on that. But excellent point. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Julie. You've mentioned this, we've discussed already, and you've mentioned in most of your intro this issue about enforcement here and the challenges that member states will be facing with the implementation on some of those proposals here, especially, not every country, like you mentioned a lot Germany, but what about other countries or smaller countries? And also there will be a need for regulatory bodies to collaborate together in different fields, privacy authorities with, like in the UK, you have this group, your forum you mentioned, DRCF, if I'm correct now, okay? And this is a great example of collaboration happening between regulatory body that needs to happen in this topic here, I believe, as well. UK, you have got some experience. But what, how can we, Julie, maybe that's the question for you, and maybe Leanda, you want to also react to it, because I'm curious to understand, enforcement, how can we avoid fragmentation also, and this kind of divide in Europe when it comes to implementing some of those proposals. And also there's a massive role for member states and to also work collaboratively with third parties here. So how do you ensure that? Perhaps you, Julie, first.
Sure. No, delighted to take that. No, absolutely. We certainly, in the Commission, for example, we have a member state expert group. We also have regular evaluation of the former Better Internet for Kids strategy by an independent academic who has also looked at how the strategy is implemented across all the different member states. And we do this on a 2-year cycle. And this will now be complemented under the new strategy with also a child-led evaluation to see that we're still on track and to see what's changing as a result of the strategy. And what we found is that there is a lot of fragmentation. Digital is sort of everywhere, but digital for children is also everywhere and sort of nowhere, because it falls between education, between technology, between digitization, public services, and so on. And so through our expert group and through this work, we have tried to help the member states to be aware of the different aspects, to cooperate, to meet together, and of course, exchange best practice. And that is one of the things that the Commission is great at, is sort of allowing this exchange on all different levels and on all different aspects. But I totally take the point that there is a lot of fragmentation. We will, probably address this, but in terms of the technology, in terms of skills, the Commission is a big organisation, that then multiplied across all the member states. It's a very complex situation. We do the best we can to encourage exchange, to try and avoid this fragmentation, but it is a challenge, definitely.
I imagine. Anyone else wants to react to this one? Yeah, Leanda.
Yes, thank you. I think for proper enforcement in the situation that we're currently in, first of all, we need to make sure that we're working on the same principles. So it's very difficult to enforce something if it's not clear. For example, when you're talking about a minor, how old a minor is, if you don't have consistent principles and it's not clear, what platforms or what services are in scope. So that's Mark's question before, Matt or Mark, sorry, regarding should it be all services? Well, yes, all services likely to be accessed by children. If we don't have the same definitions, then we really have we set ourselves a very big challenge. So first of all, we need to sort that out. Secondly, we need the right tools and the right frameworks. So I mentioned, for example, oversight, the 4-step model covering inputs, intentions, I'm missing one, and impacts. I'm still missing one, don't worry, I'll come back to it. We need this evidence databases that I mentioned before. If you don't know, for example, that harm has occurred and it's linked to a specific service or platform. So it's one thing, if you're just chasing the bad guys, so you're chasing the person who put that content up or who performed that action, instead of looking also and making note that it was because of that feature on that platform that they were able to do that. The right frameworks as well on the duties of the regulator that I mentioned before. Thirdly, we need to address the knowledge and skills gaps of the regulators. So if you have a market surveillance authority who knows nothing about children's rights, you obviously have an issue. And that's, I think, a big issue at the moment, that we're talking about economic regulators, and they don't sometimes have basic understanding of, even if you ask them who is a child, as I say, they won't say a child is anyone under 18, they might not know, right? This might seem very basic, but it's not the case. And fourthly, for good enforcement, you need civil society. So you need the NGOs who at the moment also, if you look at child rights NGOs, generally they don't have the capacity to manage the digital world. And if you look at other NGOs focusing on the digital world, they're not aware of children's rights. So I think these are 4 very important elements to enforcement.
Julie and June, perhaps on this as well, and then I'll give a last question to the panel.
Thank you. I think it's been really encouraging to see that there has been cooperation across regulators on this point, and I think that absolutely has to continue. But a second area is this embracing tech in the actual process of the review, in the oversight, and in the regulation. Because what we're seeing in certain countries where they're looking at one-by-one court orders, that really is not working. You need to be able to look across borders and look more broadly. So embrace tech by regulators, and given the investment for that, the cooperation across regulators is really important. And that area of co-creation and education is really important. So working jointly with young people across countries and working jointly across the different stakeholders to build up public awareness and knowledge, I think is really key. And no one country can do that alone, no one regulator can do that on their own. So I think hence some of the vehicles that have been developed through EU consent would be super helpful to continue. And I know there's been interest, for example, from Australia in this area, and there are also bridges being built, I'm sure, through the work that Five Rights are doing in the US. There are probably 12 countries in the world that have been looking at age assurance in the light of adult content. We have the whole of Europe looking at it in a whole range of different areas, and emerging children's codes broadly. So I think now is the inflection point. So let's see how we can keep these structures going.
Thank you. I see further questions from people in this room. So perhaps there might, is it you want to ask a question, or you want to pass? You first, okay then.
Thank you so much. My name is Larissa, and I'm here today representing the Lego Group. I'll just sit down if that's okay. So at the Lego Group, our mission is to inspire and develop the builders of tomorrow, and so that is to say children. And as digital technology plays an increasingly important role in how children play, learn, create, and build bonds with friends and families, it is of course critical that we understand and manage the impact of digital transformation on children. Society and government have understandably and appropriately prioritized safety by focusing on identification, assessment, and mitigation of the risk of harm to children. This is a critical component of the impact. However, as Leanda from the Five Rights Foundation mentioned, the digital world today is less of an option for children than for adults. Therefore, we believe that government's expectation of industry must go beyond the avoidance of harm. I appreciate that Leanda has already mentioned codes of conduct and perhaps building that ideal world in which we build upon the safety measures to empower children. But we believe there is a huge opportunity now and responsibility for governments and regulators to begin to steer the design of technology and online services to seize the potential benefits that technology has for children's development and overall well-being. Just a quick mention at the Lego Group, and with the financial support of the Lego Foundation, we've been working with UNICEF and a lot of child-centric academic institutions around the world to evaluate the impact of digital transformation and digital technology upon children's well-being. We've conducted a lot of children's consultations, and we are now developing a well-being framework with indicators with what children have told us it's important for them to gain from digital experiences. I just wanted to say we must start designing technology to respect all of children's rights online, because protecting them online means protecting all of their rights online. And so by incentivizing and encouraging companies to level up and to design for children's well-being and their best interests, we can create a blueprint for the online, innovation blueprint for the online environment that can both protect and nurture children's potential. One of the DSA's objective is to stimulate innovation. It's right in the first article. But does it stimulate the right type of innovation that can respect all of children's rights online? The UK government is discussing the online safety bill. When it's instructing services to evaluate the impact or to develop appropriate safety measures, does it also instruct the services to assess the potential benefits that the services have to children's well-being?
Can you please cut for one moment? I think that's a lot of information now and a lot of questions. We have limited time now, and I'd like to have another question here from people in the audience to take. So if we can stop here, that would be great, so that we have time for
Is my question
answering.
clear, though? Because it's also about the context. Is my question clear, or shall I...
Yeah, do you need clarification? Is it not clear enough?
Yes, please.
Yes, can you make it short, like...
What is the potential for legislation at the moment to empower businesses to then design the right type of technology for children?
Thank you. So I get this question is first, perhaps Melissa, you want to react to that one?
Yeah, thank you. I think that that legislation, the legislation that we already have should empower, but obviously with the online safety bill coming in for the UK in particular, that's going to cover more in that way as well. I think the only thing I would say, I think the work is excellent around, understanding the impact of digital transformation on children. If I put it on a more focused footing, though, what we've seen in the ICO is where organisations by legislation must do impact assessments now on children in relation to their product, their service or their platform, we have found that it's been really disappointing. Many DPIAs haven't been done where we would expect them to be done. It's part of the code. And the ones that we have seen often can be quite underwhelming as well. So I think that my instinct is that there's already legislation in place. It's foundational. It's really basic, and that's still not really being done as well as it could be, in order to make sure organisations really are thinking about the best interests of the child. I also think that there's a cultural element as well. Sorry, I'll hurry up. But I think we do also need to shift from design and data protection being very separate as well. I think that has been the case where something gets designed and the data protection gets thought about after the fact. Actually, we need that culture to really change so that the data elements are right in at the very beginning, so that the design is considered at the beginning. Don't bolt stuff on afterwards to something that's already been designed, because that's where I think it's never going to be as good. And actually, unfortunately, it's often after real harm has actually taken place as well.
Thank you. There's another question from someone in this room. So if you can present yourself as well first.
My name is Andy Vermout. I'm from the World Council for Public Diplomacy and Community Dialogue. And I had some questions regarding the age verification, because on the one hand, age verification can be something really good, but on the other hand, I see the possibilities of the metaverse for children that can be enormous positive. They can go back, for example, to the Egyptian times to build a pyramid together with other people. They can learn so much things. And so are we not making too much borders? Does legislation has to make all these borders, because it can also stop people from learning? So this is one question. Another question is regarding the protection of children against spoofing. So identity theft and online bullying, because I know there is now software on the market that people can call you with another number of somebody else, and police cannot identify these people. They cannot find it. They do everything to identify these people, and we should stop this software, because it's sold, this software, to some, and it's used by some people who are not always very positive-minded. So maybe the European Commission could also work on stopping or making legislation that this software, where you can use other identities, cannot be used. So this is another question.
Thank you for your question. I think there are two questions in there, and I don't know, maybe Dave, if you want to respond to the first part, which is also about, how can you ensure that the experience online still is a success, has a success rate, a good low friction for people. Otherwise, people, like you say, will drop from using those services online, which is a pity. So if how do you ensure that, for instance?
Okay. I mean, it's a great question. So let me just sort of answer the metaverse one, I guess, really. So we're building for the metaverse, and I think I gave you an example earlier on around the parental supervision tools, where we use not only the best interests of the child framework to inform the design of the product, but then make sure that that's transposed not only in a screen-based environment, but increasingly in immersive environment. So that's the very first time that you're trying to see that thing. And the design principles and the rights principles that are behind that should be the same. They should carry forward into that environment. Now, the metaverse is a very ambitious vision of which we're really bought into, and there are going to be a lot of different stages. And I prefer to call it extended reality, to be honest, because there's going to be augmented reality, and there's going to be a lot of stages over the next 5 to 10 years, and lots of people are going to be building the metaverse. Lego and others, and Disney and others are going to come into this space, and in those environments there are exciting educational opportunities, exciting opportunities for play, for learning, and so on. So I think for those that have had the opportunity to go into Oculus Quest, and I would urge you to do so, it is an experiential thing. It's only when you really experience how extraordinary it is. So I go back to my original point. I think Meta feels really confident that we can take those principles forward into that environment. Now, there are some challenges. So in that environment, clearly, it's much more behaviorally based. That's absolutely true. And so things like personal boundaries and safe zones and things like that we're putting in place for avatars and so on are starting to make a really big difference. But also people have to work out what the etiquette is in those environments because it's completely new. So I think, to answer your question, I think it's quite feasible to carry that rights and design-based model forward into that place. And we look forward to working with the same sets of partners in a way, and many new ones, in trying to create that metaverse environment.
Perfect. Julie, you also want to
complete? Yes, just a couple of brief points to add to that. And thank you, excellent question. was that effectively one of the things that we need to look at is what is the legal bar for a service. So we're not always trying to age gate unless there's a legal bar that you can't sell alcohol to an under 18, or that in a certain country gambling isn't appropriate for someone under a certain age. What we're hearing most platforms are wanting to do is how do you provide that age appropriate experience? So if someone is 5 to 10, how do you provide the support to that person in a way that they can understand it? If you know they're 5 to 10, what time should the notifications go off? How do you deal differently so that there isn't targeted advertising for a demographic that is under 18? So I think what lots of platforms are looking at is how do you make that experience right given the age of that individual, rather than just barring people, because stopping people from learning and thriving online is not what most people are actually looking at. And on the topic with regards the deep fakes, I think that is a really tricky one that across the board many governments are looking at from the identity perspective. But I'm not sure quite how easy that is to put back in the box, but I don't know if any of the others are looking at that from that perspective.
Yeah, we haven't got much time left, so I would suggest you continue perhaps your discussion bilaterally over the lunch between June and yourself, because I'd like now to wrap up this session, perhaps asking quickly, briefly from each of you to give your main takeaway you would like to give to the audience before we close and move on. So perhaps I'll ask Dave as well first.
It's been a really enjoyable panel first and foremost, and I'm looking forward to mixing with everybody today and all the sort of networking that goes on and these kind of things. I think one thing I would just add beyond my own remarks is just getting the balance right, not only between detection but prevention as well, and to think about this both in online and offline terms. So if you take something like CSAM, for example, there's a huge proportion of that goes on offline, and that interplay between offline and online is important. So I think prevention, detection, and responding to these kind of harms, this sort of rounded, holistic approach is really very important. And at Meta, we're deeply committed, not just to detection, which we lead in that kind of area, but particularly around prevention. And we're really keen to work with the Commission on trying to make sure that prevention is covered within the current proposal.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. And I would just say that age assurance is of age. There are a wide number of organisations that are providing age assurance, and absolutely that are keen to work with the relevant governments that are looking at enforcing the standards, supporting the standards that are coming through. And I think there's been some excellent work specifically done on minimum standards through the work of Five Rights. But what we really need is to continue this dialogue for civil society, for organisations that are concerned about the democratic elements, the freedom elements, the children's elements, to come together, and for across the data protection bodies, civil society, governments, tech providers, for us to continue this dialogue, because that transparency will be the best disinfectant. Thank you.
Thank you. Leanda?
Thank you. I think my first message would be, let's not reinvent the wheel. Children have existing established rights. They apply, as I say, to all children wherever they are. I think we need to understand that the future is digital or connected, and we shouldn't see the digital area as exceptional. We should rather seek to bring everything into our existing frameworks. I say we don't have digital rights, we have human rights, right? It's the same thing. We shouldn't start reinventing everything. I'm not saying that we don't need specific pieces of legislation and policies for the digital world, but the basic approach needs to be based on what is already established and our human rights and children's rights. And for that, therefore, we need to make sure that we take a child-centered approach when we are addressing the digital world as children use it, and not try to piece children in everywhere else.
Perfect. Melissa?
The age-appropriate design codes can work. We are seeing them work. They are making a difference. So really thrilled with the Commission's work around Better Internet for Kids and the code that we also very much support and would be very happy to help with however we could. Similar to Julie, actually, age assurance has always been a little bit of an area where we couldn't necessarily always see the perfect solutions. Those solutions have to be driven by industry. It has to be delivered by, driven by the technology advancements that there are. And we can see now that it can be done in a privacy-preserving way. It can be done without actually causing issues with other principles like data minimization, for example. So a lot more to be done there, but we can see it's working. So we just need to not lie back and make sure we keep pushing in this area.
Thank you.
And I'll keep it really short. I think, I hope you've taken from this panel today, certainly what I take from it, is that it is a really exciting and, as Melissa said, a very positive time to be working on child safety online issues. I am really optimistic that we have technology that allows us actually to change the current status quo. We have legislation, we have policies in place increasingly worldwide, certainly from us in the Commission, with the legislation we have in place, with our Better Internet for Kids strategy. It's now all about effective implementation and bringing that change about so that child's best interests are really at the centre of their digital experience. Thanks.
Thank you all for your interaction today and for all those information you've provided us. I think it was a fascinating discussion. I learned a lot myself. I hope you also learned a lot. Thank you all for your interaction online. Thank you, Mark, for your question. I see you have another question, by the way, directed directly for Dave. So I would welcome Dave or your team. You can maybe take that offline, continue discussion there. And please join me in warmly welcoming and thanking all our panel speakers for today. Thank you.